Fate is fickle. The only question is, what is the price of change?
Welcome. Today I'm reviewing the recently released The Life and Suffering of Prince Jerian. Just a few things before we begin. The first game in the series is called The Life and Suffering of Sir Bronte or Brant. I might be mispronouncing it, but there are moments I'll be referring to that game throughout the review and we'll just abbreviate it to SB. Also, for the sake of brevity, I will refer to this game, The Life and Suffering of Prince Jerian, as SPJ just to save myself time and oxygen. I played the entirety of SPJ on a Steamdeck OLED, so please be aware some issues or positives I mentioned may be specific to my hardware and may be a bit different for you depending on what you're playing the game on. As always, fast forward to the too long didn't read section if you're in a rush, otherwise let's start the review. I really enjoyed the first game SB and sunk maybe 30 plus hours all up doing multiple playthroughs, so imagine my hype when I see the announcement for SPJ this year. My mind was made up immediately that it would definitely be a purchase on release day, no doubt. To start with, what is SPJ? A narrative role-playing game from Schisma Games, published by 101XP and released in the same universe as The Life and Suffering of Sir Bronte, but follows a new protagonist and separate story. So basically we're role-playing as a prince and the world and events of SPJ are presented to us almost like a choose-your-own adventure book and accompanied by static and animated visuals along with sound and music. We are then given choices throughout the game which are affected by our stats, which then in turn affect how the game and narrative unfolds. That's a basic summary of how the game plays, but we'll dive further into both gameplay and narrative. Let's start with contextualizing the world this game takes place in. There are two predominant races in this world, Arcanians and humans. Arcanians are the upper class ruling elite. They are a race different from humans with different physiology and lifespans. The lowest Arcanians are higher in social standing than the highest humans. They enjoy special privileges and make up the nobility and royal family that rules the empire. Humans are divided into lots, which there are 3 of. Humans that belong to the highest lot are the nobility that are given titles by Arcanians. They get special privileges and basically are the elite of humans. The next lot belongs to the clergy. Humans of this lot are allowed to interpret and study the scriptures of the official faith of the empire and guide others in the faith. Then last and most least are humans who are commoners. Their lot is to basically serve those higher than them and work and toil like peasants. I had mentioned previously humans are divided up into their lots. This is part of the official religion of the empire. A person's lot is determined by their gods known as the twins and are absolute. Straying from or refusing your lot means shame and being ostracized in the waking life and the belief that there will be punishment for you in the afterlife. Now, to complicate things further, each of the aforementioned groups within society of the empire are in constant tension. So while Arcanians are above humans, they're not a monolith. They have their own houses and lineages and their own histories and traditions that cause them to be at odds with each other and even the clergy. The humans are also in tension. The nobles believe in tradition and hierarchy. Commoners who are entrepreneurs are acquiring a lot of wealth, which gives them influence that can undermine the nobility, so naturally, therefore some reforms and doing things differently. Even the official faith has a group splintering off and believing that there is another valid way to interpret and follow the official religion. Our place in this world, among all of this, is that we are the actual heir to the throne, Prince Jerian. We start from when he's a young child all the way up until the end of his life. Unfortunately for Prince Jerian, he's the heir at a very difficult time. The empire will undergo a historic reform and he needs to influence what those reforms will look like and how it will affect all members of the empire regardless of what lot they belong to. Prince Jerian can't just be dictatorial and implement what he wants. He needs the support of others to make his ambitions happen, whether that's due to the influence of their wealth, their military might, their religious influence, whatever it is, you need to have someone backing you. This means Jerian has to try and strike a delicate balance so that the empire doesn't crumble and implode. Jerian also has to balance his choices which affect the empire with choices relating to his personal life. Often you'll be caught between the choice that's more aligned with your duty as a future emperor or picking an option that's more true to who you are as a person. SPJ has done a great job of deepening and widening the scope of their world building. There were a lot of questions in the first game that we've got answers to in this game, especially around the Arcanians, the faith, the empire, and its history. It just makes the world feel much more fleshed out. The great thing about this is that whether you play SPJ first or second, there's no set order to play these games. You can approach either title first and still get a complete experience across the two. So for those thinking they need to play SB first to enjoy this one, you do not. The pacing and total time to complete the story of SPJ overall feels good. I do feel maybe the childhood and youth portion of the game feels a bit lean. It could have had more moments in there, but it made sense in the long run. The portion where you're going to get involved in the political side of things is much more dense, as that's the meat of the story and game and where your choices are most interesting and impactful. for. One complete playthrough will take maybe 3 to 5 total hours depending on your reading speed, decision making speed, and whether you commit to your choice or if you choose to replay segments to get a specific outcome. I recommend you do a first playthrough and just choose a life path for your first run. If you're someone that's a snobby douche, just commit to it and be a snobby elitist douche and let it ride no matter what happens. That's where you will get a lot of replayability by choosing what kind of prince you'll be each time and experimenting on each playthrough. I've completed maybe 4 to 5 playthroughs all up with different Jerians, the benevolent type, the Prince Harry type, the selfish conniving type, and so on. In general, I'm satisfied with how each playthrough concluded. I did find some story options, particularly with family members, to perhaps be a bit forced. So with some choices, if you don't side with a family member at a particular point, they can then have a status which means going forward they will never really trust you with their deepest hopes and dreams. I could be on really good terms with a family member in every choice prior, pretty much siding with them regardless of the consequences before this one. And yet if I don't follow through this one time, that's it, hopes and dreams shattered. Some of these situations feel a bit weird too, like in one instance when your dad, the emperor, wants you to side with him, but at the risk of making yourself and the royal family look like idiots in front of the empire. It feels a bit strange that the emperor, even with his selfish desires, wouldn't understand what's at stake and make the more dutiful decision. Feels a bit out of character and forced, but to be fair, there is a possible story justification for it that I won't share due to spoilers, but yeah, it just feels a bit iffy. And some of these choices don't feel like they're that heavy to warrant that level of distrust. I don't know, maybe I have a very low EQ and I'm a bit cold, but I feel those decisions should have been more like decreasing your relationship stat rather than causing them to never be able to confide their deepest hopes and dreams with you. I do acknowledge it could potentially be compulsory by the game to set it up for the next parts of the story, but to me it just felt a bit off and a little bit forced. I'm a forever aspiring writer, so my opinions on writing in general aren't worth very much, but I enjoy the way the narrative was written. With games like SPJ, the writing is really important as it dictates the tone and pace as well as influencing how we interpret events in the story. SPJ is written in a way that didn't make it a chore to get through, but not so simplified that it does a disservice to the gravity of the events taking place. I did pick up some spelling mistakes more often than I expected, which surprised me. This game is heavily text-based, so I expect this to be proofread to hell and back before release. To be honest, it doesn't bother me, but I do feel the need to mention this considering the type of game SPJ is. They are probably most likely patched by now, about 2 or so weeks after release. In terms of your choices throughout the game and how consequences play out in general, they've done a good job. There are some choices that I felt were maybe too simple. For the most part, SPJ does well to keep you guessing what might happen with your choices in the long run. There are some interesting moments where past choices can come back to either haunt or reward you, and often you won't really see it coming. There are also moments where you'll have a set path you've decided on. For instance, maybe you'll pick all options that are beneficial for commoners. Then the game does a good job of giving you curveballs where you may need to seriously consider making a choice that's antithetical to the path you've chosen. These curveballs can have consequences that may affect you long term or your relationship with someone important in a serious way, so this keeps you on your toes. However, some options felt too binary. For example, when you're prompted to consider spending time with a romantic interest, you're only given 3 options which clearly align with 3 different types of life paths. I'm biased that I love games where you have multiple romantic interests. You don't need to be able to get with all of them, but it's nice that your character can potentially find interest in a few different people. Just makes the game feel more alive. Ideally, I'd love more options, but I understand for narrative mechanic purposes it's better to have less. However, I wish each potential romantic interest had a bit more complicated personality, so it wasn't so clear cut what sort of life path you're enforcing by selecting him. Now let's head to gameplay. As you work through each chapter of Prince Jerian's life, you'll go through various events and situations of different severities. At the end of understanding who was involved and what happened during these events, the game will present you with choices. Your choice affects how the rest of the story unfolds and what other characters and factions think of you, along with affecting your stats and resources. Some choices in the game will only be available to you if you can pass the required skill check or have a sufficient bond with a character or faction. The harder skill checks for choices that have a greater or more favorable consequence will have multiple checks to satisfy. So for example, you may need to be at a certain level of scholarship and have a certain level of passion to unlock a choice to prevent you from upsetting any faction with your choice, whereas other choices at that same time may all have some faction being upset no matter what option you choose. With some of your stats, they sit on a spectrum, so as you draw closer to one side, you're giving up access to choices that would be open with the other end of the spectrum. For example, your personality is made up of 6 attributes, with 3 of them sitting opposite the other 3. On one side are love, will, reason, the type of things that make Jerian a more passionate and emotional person. The other side has feelings, blood, law, which make Jerian a more calculated and collected person. For other relationships and attributes, it's a similar setup. The more you make choices that support one side, you'll lose out on the other. For example, if you support the commoners' cause, you'll lose favor with the elites. You'll also see gauges for your relationship with different factions in the empire. If either of them fall to 0, that can cause unrest or big problems. You'll also have a gauge for revolution, as many choices can potentially stir the general populace into negative sentiments, leading to a revolt. Once that reaches 10, your playthrough comes to an end no matter what. This is where it becomes a huge balancing act. Regardless of what you do, very rarely are you able to make a choice that makes everyone happy or doesn't piss someone off. Due to that, you'll find yourself sometimes having to make choices to either avoid pushing a faction to breaking point or ensuring the empire doesn't start revolting. The cost of that is sometimes you'll have to displease your allies or factions you're trying to build trust with. The other cost is alteration to your personality. For example, in one situation you may have to choose the logical option when you've been a more passionate character. That will decrease your emotional side and may lock you out of future passionate choices, which can cause further issues during your playthrough. Due to this, you really must consider every choice and think about your choice in the context of your relationships and the empire. While this may seem very similar to the first game SB, the newer mechanics that have been introduced into SPJ mix this up a bit and I think are really great introductions. The first being Prince Jerian's sanity beads. This is an unreplenishable resource for desperate times where you really need to select the choice that's been locked out due to failing the personality check. The cost of this is that with each use, you get 5 total. Jerian will lose a bit of himself and affect his personality attributes when one is sacrificed to get past a skill check. I never used all his sanity beads, so I'm curious what happens there. I assume you kind of just go mental since your sanity is at 0 basically and your playthrough is done, or you're locked out of a lot of choices, meaning you don't have much choice and have to go through whatever's left to you. The other mechanic is using the blood of your ancestors. So in this world, Arcanians are different in that they fuse with what's called the blood tide. This is basically the blood that holds the memories and essence of their ancestors, where they can access their skills and memories. Think of it like a gross, violent version of the Avatar state from the Avatar cartoon. This mechanic allows you to unlock certain choices using the power of the blood of your ancestors, similar to the sanity beads. This mechanic is replenishable, but the thing to be wary of is that replenishing this and relying on it too often means you neglect improving other stats. However, if you don't manage to replenish this, it will really hurt in some parts of the game, so you have to be careful and pick your moments so you're not over or under relying on the blood tide. The other interesting thing about the blood tide from a role-playing perspective is that technically one can be consumed by it. So there are moments where Jerian is reliving the memories of his ancestors, and his ancestors can actually sort of persuade Jerian to follow what they've done in the past, and it's sort of up to you whether you will accept it, deny it, or maybe meet somewhere in the middle. And I guess from a role-playing perspective, it's really interesting whether you will accept the knowledge and experience of your ancestors under the condition that you sort of succumb to what they want, or will you sort of outright refuse and reject their influence and decide to be your own person, and maybe at the cost of being cut off from their own experience and knowledge. And honestly, when you juggle all of this is seriously quite an effort to make it all the way through to the end. Of my 4 or 5 playthroughs, I only managed to get 1 complete playthrough where I made it to the end alive. By the final act, I really did feel like I was on the cusp of war breaking out and losing the empire should I make one wrong move to cause a revolt or upset one faction too much. My Prince Jerian was basically 1 beat away from insanity and dry on blood like a starving vampire. I had to make a lot of concessions and make choices strategically, even if they were antithetical to what my prince was about, just to get to the end and make sure that I made it to the end with the reforms in place and actually not dying or suffering from a revolt. And that's what makes the game fun. This isn't a nice, chill, easygoing visual novel. There's a lot of tough choices to be made, and a lot of times it's not really choosing the best choice, but rather the choice your Prince Jerian can live with at the end of the day. Now to some other parts of the game that came up during my playtime, which is about 22 or so hours now since I started playing on release. I did like the few moments with voice acting in the cutscenes. Depending on how well this game does and maybe future investment, I'll love a mode for the next installment, or maybe even this one, to have a voiceover mode, full voice acting for several characters, or maybe full-on narration, and will just be something cool if you're going to replay it and just want to do something a bit more cinematic. I can only imagine how the parts with Camille would present if you got a voice actor with a real sultry voice to deliver those lines. You know what I mean? You know, I know what kind of man I am. But I acknowledge the way this game is presented is very much like a book, so I'd understand if that's not something they would want to pursue for fear of making the aesthetic not as cohesive. I also like that they had the option for animated illustrations. At release for Steam Deck, if you had animated illustrations toggled on, it would cause the game to crash. Disabling it was the only workaround, but meant you only had static illustrations. Just before this review was complete, a patch was available to fix this issue. And since the patch, I've tried animated illustrations and haven't had any issues or had the game crash since. Although it doesn't feel like it would to a big degree, having animated illustrations is a big difference than having static images. It adds just enough energy, so to speak, without overdoing it. I previously mentioned about the aesthetic being presented like a book. Although it doesn't feel like it would to a big degree, having animated illustrations is a big difference than having static images. It adds just enough energy, so to speak, without overdoing it. I do think they could have added more types of illustrations to accompany the text. A lot of pictures get reused and recycled and makes moments feel less unique or more generic. They may have added some since the patch, I'm not too sure, but at least from release, that's what it was like for me. It would also add a little bit in terms of replayability. I'd be keen to see what illustrations are used at different life paths if there were more, especially as the art style of SPJ is very striking. It also would have been cool to have a gallery mode just to see some of these illustrations in their own right. They're really well done and some of them look outright cool. I do like the option to hold your mouse or trigger or trackpad to confirm your choice. That's one of the biggest problems I have with narrative games or visual novels. Sometimes you can make a choice by mistake, but holding to confirm helps prevent that happening. It's not 100% going to prevent misclicks. I did have a few of those, but at least it will help reduce it. Playing the game in handheld mode is fine and works without issue. This is a great game to play if you're someone that likes to read before bed. It's a very portable friendly game if you're traveling or commuting somewhere. Probably not a game to pick up and play if you're not playing regularly. I think this game is best enjoyed when you're really engaging with it and not taking huge chunks of time between play sessions. I would have liked another mode that allows you to sort of speed run the story and just give you the choices so you can do quick playthroughs to experiment with a mechanic or see how a different choice plays out. In one of my playthroughs, I wanted to keep the same decisions and just alter one or two of the choices I made. I would have appreciated not having to spam click through each chapter. Instead, just getting a summary of what happened up until this point, then given options, then continue on, instead of having to sit through each and every piece of writing to get to the choices. I didn't notice anything unusual or iffy about playing it docked either, and the game scaled nicely, and I didn't notice anything blurring or such, unless my eyes are already that effed and I didn't notice. Audio and sound effects do a good job of adding to the atmosphere. Although there wasn't voice acting as much or anything like that, there are sound effects to keep things from feeling empty. The music changes appropriately with what happens during the narrative, intensifying when there's a tense moment, and likewise easing up when the situation has a bit more levity. The sound effects are simple but are really effective. For instance, if you're reading, there's a clash of swords, you'll hear it, or if there's someone entering a room, you'll hear the door opening. Simple stuff, but it amplifies the way the game is presented. Had the audio been a bit more busy than this or anything more, it might have been a bit too distracting while you're trying to read. I also appreciate that you can turn off seeing the consequences of your choices for a true blind playthrough. Like I mentioned previously about just going for a playthrough and letting it ride, I'd say this option would be most beneficial. You don't see what gets affected, and so will naturally follow what you believe is the right choice instead of seeing the consequences and then rethinking your choice. The other thing I just wanted to point out too, which I thought was really cool and wanted to acknowledge, was that the devs allowed people to download the first game SB for a limited time, and then after a certain date back in July would keep it forever on Steam. And I thought that's just a huge dub to devs for allowing people to get the first game free, using that as sort of like an introduction into the world, and then if they're wanting more they can get into SPJ. And I thought that's really awesome, and I wish more devs would do that. Alright, time now for the too long didn't read portion of the review, where we ask, is this game worth your hard-earned money, and what we would rate this out of 10. This game was fun to play. I enjoyed it a lot, which is no surprise as I enjoyed the first game very much too. I guess the concern someone might have is what improvement could be made from the previous game, considering it's a pretty straightforward game mechanic wise. I feel they mostly delivered on that front and did it in an organic way where the world and characters justified the changes around using the blood tide and sanity beads, for example. I also like the story and how they fleshed out this world a bit more. I hope there's more to come, and I think there's plenty of stories still left to be told in this world. This game is definitely for fans of the first game, lovers of RPGs that lean heavily on consequence of choices, and lovers of visual novels and anything that has fantasy elements. I can't quite describe it, but there is something that feels a bit different with SPJ compared to SB. To be fair, I haven't gone back to SB to do the comparison, but there's just something there that doesn't quite hit the same. It doesn't make SPJ worse per se, but it's something I think is fair to acknowledge. And to be fair, I do wonder if it's because some time has passed and you kind of look back on SB a bit more fondly. You don't really think of the nitpicks that you would have had at the time, and thus it's a bit of an unfair comparison, because sort of what happens with new release games that come after, our beloved first game is that you're kind of just battling nostalgia to a degree, and you're not really comparing apples to apples or oranges to oranges. So I don't know if it's that, but yeah, just something to think about. The other thing I also wanted to raise just before I bring up my rating is that there is discourse around AI use potentially in this game. You can see on Steam that people are saying that there's potential AI use for the illustrations or the writing and so on. I just wanted to say I have not investigated that further. I did not see any AI disclaimers on the Steam page for the game, and yeah, to be honest, I'm not completely sure about it either. But I did want to bring that up because I feel it's fair for people to make informed decisions. Every everyone will have their own opinions and thoughts on AI use. Some people will be neutral about it, others will hate it, and others will encourage it. But I thought it's fair that, if you're really seriously considering this game based on this review, that you understand that there is the discourse around that AI use, and that, you just be informed that the discussion is out there. Whether it's valid or true or not, I have no idea, but that's sort of up to you. So at the end of the day, I'm going to give The Life and Suffering of Prince Jerian a solid 7.5 out of 10. There's enough holding the game back from being in that 8 range where it's a must recommend, must play. It's not a bad game. It does give a bit of a different vibe than SB. I don't know why that is, but yeah, it might be worth looking into a little bit to see exactly why, but there's enough of a different feeling that, you can't really ignore it. And if it had the same exact feeling or gave you the same sort of vibe, you'd be safe in that, cool, we've just sort of built on what the first game was, but there's something different there that I can't quite explain. Now, the next question is this worth the price? On release, I got this game a little bit cheaper, I think due to already owning the first game. I can't remember now exactly why. The original price was $38.49 New Zealand, but I ended up paying $32.71 New Zealand. That's roughly the price of an extra large pizza from my local pizza place, and they do really good pizza. Would I rather have bought this game or go for the pizza? The Life and Suffering of Prince Jerian was worth it, but I will put a bit of a asterisk beside that. For me, I feel it was worth it. I was a fan of the first game. I enjoyed this game. I probably will replay it multiple times. I feel like I will get my money out of it. For others, if this is a series you're sort of new to, or you're not really into the genre, or you really love the first game, I will say approach with caution and maybe look to get this on a sale, or maybe when there's a discount going on. Reason for that is you may not like it as much as you did the first game, and you may not like this if this is a genre that you're new to, so just be aware around that. For me, I'm all good with it. I'm happy with the game, but for others, be a bit cautious if you're not as confident. And that's my review of the game. Please tell me your thoughts in the comments. If you did play it, if you agree with my takes or you disagree, please let me know why. Until the next one, take care and off out.